February 10th, 2002, Mazatlan, Mexico. The city is packed with hundreds of thousands of people celebrating Carnival, one of the biggest street parties on the continent. Music is blasting, beer is flowing, floats are rolling down the boardwalk. And somewhere in that crowd, the most feared enforcer in Mexican cartel history is hunting a man. He's not on vacation. He's not celebrating. He came to Mazatlan with one job: to put a bullet in his biggest rival. But what Ramon Arellano Felix doesn't know, what nobody on his team told him, is that the entire trip is a setup. His own man sold him out. His enemy is already watching him from a hotel balcony. And the person who orchestrated this whole thing, it's not a rival cartel general. It's not the Mexican military. It's El Chapo. The same man Ramon spent a decade trying to kill is the one who finally got him. Not with guns blazing, not in a direct shootout, but with a phone call, a lie, and one man willing to betray his own boss to save his sister. Stay with me until the end of this video, because by the time I'm done, you're going to understand exactly how El Chapo turned Ramon Arellano Felix's obsession against him. You're going to hear about the traitor inside his own crew who set the whole thing in motion. You're going to find out why the body wasn't even confirmed to be Ramon's for over a month after he died. And you're going to learn why the corner where Ramon Arellano Felix bled out on Carnival Sunday is now a tourist attraction. A stop on Mazatlan's narco tour, where locals ride past in open-air taxis and point at the exact spot where the most feared hitman in Tijuana cartel history took his last breath on enemy territory. This is the final 24 hours of Ramon Arellano Felix. Now, before we get into the day itself, you need to understand who this man actually was, because a lot of people know the Arellano Felix name but don't fully understand what Ramon specifically represented inside that organization. The Arellano Felix brothers, there were 7 of them, built the Tijuana cartel into what many experts called the most powerful drug trafficking organization in all of Mexico throughout the 1990s. They controlled the most valuable drug corridor in the Western Hemisphere, the Tijuana-San Diego border crossing. Hundreds of tons of cocaine, marijuana, heroin, all flowing north through their plaza. They were making billions. They had law enforcement, politicians, and military officers on payroll on both sides of the border. But among all 7 brothers, Ramon was different. He wasn't the brains. That was Benjamin. He wasn't the businessman. That was Eduardo. Ramon was the weapon. 6'2", 253 pounds, with a sadistic streak that even people inside the cartel found unsettling. The DEA described him as one of the most violent drug traffickers in the Western Hemisphere. He personally participated in murders. He didn't just order hits, he showed up for them. He derived satisfaction from violence in a way that hardened cartel members described as almost pathological. By 1997, he was number 451 on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list. The US government had a reward out for him, and yet, for years, nobody could touch him. But here's the thing about men like Ramon. The same aggression that made him untouchable also made him predictable. His enemies understood something crucial. If you dangled the right target in front of him, if you made him think he had a clean shot at a rival, he would walk straight into the fire without blinking. And that is exactly what El Chapo and El Mayo counted on. Let's go back to understand how we got here, because the war between Ramon Arellano Felix and the Sinaloa cartel, specifically El Chapo and El Mayo, didn't start in 2002. It started over a decade earlier, and every year of that war is what put Ramon in Mazatlan on that Carnival Sunday. Back in the 1980s, Ramon and El Chapo were actually on the same side. Both came up under the Guadalajara cartel, the original Mexican drug trafficking superpower run by Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo. When that organization collapsed in 1989 after the murder of DEA agent Enrique Camarena, the territory got divided up. The Arellano Felix brothers took Tijuana. El Chapo and El Mayo built what became the Sinaloa cartel. For a brief window, they coexisted. They did business. Some of them were genuinely friendly. Then everything fell apart. The breaking point came from a combination of disrespect and territory. El Chapo sent a drunk associate named Rayo Lopez to represent him at a party in Tijuana. Ramon, who had zero patience for disrespect in any form, shot Lopez in the head. That single moment turned business partners into blood enemies. From that point forward, the Tijuana Cartel and the Sinaloa Cartel were at war. Not just a business dispute, a personal, visceral, decade-long war with bodies on both sides. In 1992, Ramon's gunmen hit a nightclub called Christine's in Puerto Vallarta. They were hunting El Chapo. He barely escaped. Innocent bystanders died in the crossfire. El Mayo told associates afterward that the only thing he regretted was that Ramon hadn't been killed that night. He called him a very dangerous enemy. That quote surfaces years later in trial testimony from El Chapo's federal case in Brooklyn, and it tells you everything about how personal this had become. Then came the moment that pushed the war to a completely different level. In 1993, at the Guadalajara International Airport, Ramon's gunmen were waiting to ambush El Chapo. El Chapo showed up early and slipped through. But when Cardinal Juan Posadas Ocampo arrived in a similar-looking vehicle, the gunman opened fire. The cardinal was killed. The assassination of a Catholic cardinal at an international airport in broad daylight sent shockwaves through Mexico. El Chapo fled to Guatemala. He was eventually arrested and put in prison. And while El Chapo sat behind bars for the next 8 years, Ramon Arellano Felix ran wild. This is important because it explains the energy Ramon was carrying by 2001, when El Chapo finally escaped from prison. He'd been out for barely a year. And one of the first things he did after getting out was link back up with El Mayo and put a coordinated target on every Arellano Felix brother still standing. Ramon had spent years assuming El Chapo would never be free again. Now the man was back, and he was coming with everything he had. By 2002, El Chapo and El Mayo had stopped playing defense. They had gone fully on offense. And El Mayo, who was from Sinaloa State, who had grown up in that region, had turned Mazatlan into a fortress. Local police were on his payroll. Government officials were connected to his network. El Mayo knew every corner of that city, and when carnival season came around each year, he sometimes spent the weekend in Mazatlan almost openly, not cowering in a safe house, but watching the parade from a hotel balcony with his family, because Mazatlan was his city, and everyone in it knew it. This is where the trap starts to take shape. Ramon had a man inside his operation named Carlos Tirado Lizarraga. Trusted. Inner circle. Part of the logistics network. And sometime in early 2002, El Chapo and El Mayo found a way to get to Tirado, but not with money. They didn't flip him with a better offer. According to accounts that circulated through the cartel world afterward, they had his sister, a woman named Araceli, kidnapped and held hostage. The message to Tirado was simple and brutal. Set your boss up, or your sister dies. That is a level of psychological pressure that is almost impossible to put into words. This is not a man who chose greed over loyalty. This is a man who was forced to choose between his boss and his blood. And he chose his sister. So Tirado picks up the phone and calls Ramon. And he tells him something Ramon has been waiting years to hear. El Mayo is in Mazatlan for carnival. Only 2 bodyguards, exposed. It's the perfect window, the kind of opportunity that only comes around once. Now, you or I might stop and ask a basic question. Why would El Mayo, the head of a multi-billion-dollar cartel, be walking around in Mazatlan with only 2 guards during the biggest street party of the year? That question alone should have given Ramon pause. But it didn't, because this was Ramon Arellano Felix, the man who shaved his head and wore a bulletproof vest because he wanted to be in the field. The man who never sent someone to do what he could do himself. The man whose entire reputation was built on being the one who showed up. When someone told him a rival was vulnerable, his instinct wasn't to slow down and analyze. It was to move. And that instinct is exactly what El Chapo was counting on. But here's what really went down on El Mayo's side of the board. He already knew Ramon was coming. The city was already his. His people were positioned through the Zona Dorada, the tourist hotel strip where the carnival crowds were thickest. The local police, who were on El Mayo's payroll, had eyes across every block of that area. And El Mayo himself? He was not hiding. According to reports from people who were in Mazatlan that weekend, he was on the balcony of a hotel on Paseo Olas Altas, watching the streets below where Ramon was about to go hunting. Let that land for a second. The man Ramon came to Mazatlan to kill was watching him from above. The hunter was already the hunted, and he didn't know it yet. February 5th, 2002. Ramon Arellano. Felix arrives in Mazatlan. He brings 5 of his hitmen. No armored convoy, no large security detail. The whole point is to stay invisible, blend into the carnival crowds, move like tourists, execute the hit, and disappear back to Tijuana before anyone realizes what happened. They check into a hotel in the Zona Dorada, the main tourist hotel strip along the beach. It's smart cover. Hundreds of thousands of visitors are pouring into the city all week. 6 men in a white Volkswagen Beetle don't attract attention in that environment. For the next 5 days, Ramon and his crew run reconnaissance. They are seen leaving the hotel repeatedly in the white VW, scouting the streets, identifying where El Mayo moves, mapping escape routes. They are careful and patient. This is not a sloppy operation. Ramon has been a fugitive from both the US and Mexican governments for years without being caught. He knows how to operate in hostile territory. Mazatlan is Sinaloa state. This is deep enemy ground, but his confidence never wavers. He has been doing this his whole life. He feels untouchable. That confidence is the thing that kills him. February 9th, the night before Carnival Sunday. Mazatlan is already electric. People have been camped on the boardwalk since Friday morning to secure viewing spots for the parade floats and the comparsas, the costume dance troupes that march through the streets during Carnival week. Banda music is shaking the hotel windows up and down the strip. The city smells like fireworks and street food and beer. Hundreds of thousands of people are already packed shoulder to shoulder on the Malecón. By tomorrow afternoon, the first full parade will roll and the city will be at absolute maximum intensity. Inside their hotel room in the Zona Dorada, Ramon and his crew go over the plan one final time. Tirado has confirmed the intelligence. El Mayo is here. He's exposed. Sunday morning, before the afternoon parade locks down the streets, is the window. The crowd gives them cover. The chaos gives them an exit. The weapons are cached in the hotel room. They know the streets from 5 days of reconnaissance. Tomorrow is the day. What Ramon does not know is that across the city, El Mayo's people have been in position for days. Police officers on the Sinaloa payroll have been briefed. Gunmen are scattered through the Zona Dorada at key points. And Tirado, the man Ramon trusts with the logistics of his own escape route, has already confirmed to El Mayo's side everything: where Ramon is sleeping, how many men he brought, what the plan is for the morning. February 10th, 2002, Carnival Sunday. The city is already in full noise before the sun gets high. Drums, air horns, the smell of street food frying. The afternoon parade hasn't started yet, but the crowds are already out early, staking their spots on the Malecón. This is the biggest day of the biggest party in Mazatlan. Thousands of visitors who don't know each other are sharing food and laughing and pressing up against the barricades along the boardwalk. Somewhere around 10 in the morning, Ramon makes his move. He and his crew load into the white Volkswagen Beetle and pull out of the hotel for a final reconnaissance before going in. The plan: locate El Mayo's position, confirm, then move. Quick and clean. But they make one mistake. As they drive down Rodolfo T. Loaiza Street, now called Playa Gaviotas, moving through the Zona Dorada hotel strip, they go the wrong way against the flow of carnival traffic. A patrol car from the state ministerial police spots the white VW going in the wrong direction on Rafael Buelna Avenue near the hotel zone and moves to intercept. These are Sinaloa State Police. These are El Mayo's officers. The moment those officers flag them down, Ramon makes a decision that costs him his life. Instead of stopping, instead of talking his way out the way he has done countless times before with his false credentials and his government-issued fake IDs, the crew accelerates and cuts sharply into the parking lot of a nearby hotel. They abandon the car and scatter on foot into the businesses and streets around Bugambilias Street. Ramon and his bodyguard, Alhambra, break away from the group and move on foot toward the street. 2 other members of the crew duck into a pharmacy nearby and start flipping through magazines, trying to blend in as regular customers. 2 more, Marcos Asamat Hernandez and Sergio Reyes, make it all the way to a restaurant called Tony's before officers catch up with them and take them into custody. At this point, the operation is fully compromised. The crew is scattered. 2 men are being arrested. Police are swarming the area. Every rational calculation says, abort. Get out of the city. Come back another time. But Ramon Arellano Felix is not aborting. He is still hunting. Even as his crew falls apart around him, even as law enforcement is closing in on every side, Ramon, on foot, in enemy territory, on what should be the most paranoid morning of his life, is still moving through the Zona Dorada, looking for El Mayo Zambada. That tells you everything you need to know about who this man was. And here is where the 2 versions of what happened next diverge. And both versions are extraordinary. The official government account, a state police officer named Angel Antonio Arias Torres, a former police commander, spots a man on the street near the pharmacy area who presents a badge from the Attorney General's office. The man gives his name as Jorge Perez Lopez. The officer is not satisfied. He presses further. Suddenly, the man draws his weapon and shoots the officer twice in the chest at close range. The officer, hit, falling, bleeding out, raises his handgun one final time as he drops and fires. The bullet hits the man in the head, and that is how one of Mexico's most wanted drug traffickers ends, shot by a dying cop on a Sunday morning in the middle of a city celebrating Carnival. The street version, the one that has circulated through Sinaloa for more than 2 decades, documented by Mexican investigative journalists. Ramon's gun ran dry. He emptied the magazine, and the officer, who was not a random patrol cop but one of El Mayo's network members planted in the area, physically subdued him, and then executed him at point-blank range. Immediately after, a vehicle on Cameron Sabalo Avenue stopped, and a man climbed out with an assault rifle and opened fire on the officer to eliminate the only living witness to what actually happened. Both versions end in exactly the same place. Ramon Arellano Felix and his bodyguard Alhambra are face-up on the sidewalk at the corner of Rodolfo T. Loaiza and Gaviotas, in the Zona Dorada of Mazatlan, in the middle of Carnival Sunday, in full public view. The crowd around them scatters in panic. A few blocks away, the banda music keeps playing, and the most feared hitman in the history of the Tijuana cartel, the man El Mayo once called a very dangerous enemy, the man El Chapo had been trying to kill since 1989, is dead on a tourist strip sidewalk in Sinaloa. In the pocket of the body, a fake ID. The name on it reads Jorge Lopez Perez, a supposed government agent. Ramon always carried false credentials. It's how he had moved through Mexico for years as a fugitive on 2 countries' most wanted lists. On this morning, the fake badge kept his death quiet. Authorities initially logged the shooting as a standard confrontation with a man claiming to be a PGR agent. At the time, it barely made the news. Shootings during Carnival Week in Mazatlan were not unusual events. Nobody standing in that crowd realized what had just happened. The first people who knew were his enemies. El Chapo and El Mayo had confirmation before the body was cold. What happened after the shooting tells you everything about how deeply the cartel had penetrated every level of Mexican institutions. Within hours of Ramon dying on that sidewalk, people claiming to be family members of the deceased showed up at the scene. They presented documentation, they signed paperwork, and then they left, taking the body with them. By the time the dust settled, police had no idea where the remains went. No body, no DNA, no confirmation of anything. For weeks, the shooting stayed buried. It was filed, logged, and largely forgotten in the noise of Carnival Week. Then the rumors started. Mexican media began reporting that the man killed in the Zona Dorada might be Ramon Arellano Felix, FBI 10 Most Wanted, FBI number 451. The enforcer every law enforcement agency in North America had been hunting for years. Mexico's Attorney General Rafael Macedo de la Concha told reporters it was possible, but said they couldn't confirm it. No body, no DNA, no certainty. The DEA was watching this closely. Director Asa Hutchinson had publicly stated just days before the Mazatlan shooting that capturing Ramon and Benjamin Arellano Felix was a top priority for his agency. Now there was a chance one of them was already dead, and they couldn't prove it. The government needed DNA from a blood relative. They went to Francisco Rafael, the eldest Arellano Felix brother. already sitting in a Mexican federal prison. They asked him for a blood sample. Francisco Rafael refused. He wouldn't cooperate. Whether that was denial, grief, or a deliberate stall to give his remaining brothers time to react and regroup, the refusal worked. The DNA confirmation was delayed for over a month. During that time, a body was even buried in Tijuana that was rumored to be Ramon's. But without DNA, nothing was official. The official confirmation came weeks later. Ramon Eduardo Arellano Felix was dead. But by that time, the cartel world had already reacted. On March 9th, 27 days after Ramon was killed on that Mazatlan sidewalk, the Mexican army moved on a residence in Puebla and arrested Benjamin Arellano Felix, the strategic mastermind of the entire organization, along with one of his hitmen. The timing is not a coincidence. With Ramon dead, with the enforcement arm of the cartel gone, with the psychological terror that his name carried suddenly neutralized, the intelligence apparatus that had been building cases against the brothers activated fully. The muscle was gone. The man who made people too afraid to move against the Arellanos was buried in an unmarked grave. And the army moved on Benjamin immediately. Inside the Tijuana cartel, the aftermath was something between grief and structural collapse. Ramon was not just an enforcer, he was the psychological engine of the whole operation. His reputation alone had kept rivals cautious for over a decade. The moment that reputation died on a Mazatlan sidewalk, the entire calculus shifted for every other cartel, every plaza boss, every criminal organization that had been operating in the Tijuana cartel's shadow. No cap. The wolves started moving immediately. Back at the hotel in the Zona Dorada where Ramon's crew had been staying, police found 2 more of his men holed up in a room. One of them was identified as a member of the Narco Juniors, the infamous gang of young, wealthy Mexican-Americans from San Diego who had been recruited as sicarios by the Arellano Felix brothers throughout the 90s. Bad Bunny later played a fictionalized version of one of these Narco Juniors in the Netflix series, Narcos, Mexico. Their presence in that hotel room tells you how deeply binational this operation was. This wasn't just a Mexican cartel running Tijuana. It was a network that ran from the streets of Barrio Logan in San Diego all the way down through the Pacific coast of Mexico, and now it was falling apart in a hotel room in Mazatlan. As for Tirado, the man who made the call that brought Ramon to his death, he was never publicly identified in the official version of events. The government stuck to the traffic stop story. Officially, it was a police confrontation. No mention of a traitor, no mention of a kidnapped sister, no mention of El Chapo's hand in it. But in the cartel world, that information traveled fast. The story of Carlos Tirado and his sister, the setup, the phone call, it circulated through the criminal ecosystem within days of the shooting. And in a world where betrayal carries permanent consequences, Tirado's fate after that point is not part of the public record. But you can use your imagination. El Chapo never publicly claimed credit. That is not how these things work. But years later, at his federal trial in the Eastern District of New York and Brooklyn, a witness named Jesus Zambada Garcia, El Rey, El Mayo's own brother, took the stand and testified about it directly. He said El Chapo openly told people he had arranged Ramon's death, that it gave him genuine satisfaction, that if there was one thing in his entire career that pleased him, it was this. El Rey testified, and this comes directly from trial transcript, that El Chapo disfrutó la muerte. El Chapo enjoyed the death. After a decade of nightclub shootouts, of airport ambushes, of watching a cardinal get killed in the crossfire of a war that Ramon started, after all of that, he finally settled it. Not with more firepower, with intelligence, with patience, with one man's love for his sister turning into a weapon. The death of Ramon Arellano Felix didn't just remove one man from the board, it ended an era in Mexican organized crime. The Tijuana cartel of the 1990s was arguably the most powerful criminal organization in all of Mexico. They had territory, infrastructure, political connections, billions of dollars, and, most critically, they had Ramon. He was the reason nobody challenged them directly. He was the reason the business kept moving and rivals kept their distance. Fear is a currency in the cartel world, and Ramon was the Tijuana cartel's most valuable asset. The moment he was gone, everything started to depreciate. Francisco Javier Arellano Felix was arrested in 2006, caught by the United States Coast Guard at sea. Eduardo Arellano Felix was taken down in 2008 in Tijuana after a military shootout. Benjamin, who had been arrested just weeks after Ramon died, was eventually extradited to the United States and pled guilty to racketeering and money laundering charges. One by one, the brothers who had seemed untouchable for over a decade were gone, in federal prisons, extradited to the U.S., or dead. Francisco Rafael, the one who refused to give a blood sample for his brother's DNA confirmation, was released from prison years later, tried to live quietly in Los Cabos under a fake name, and was murdered in 2013 at a birthday party by a man disguised as a clown. Shot 5 times in the head with a Belgian-made pistol, in front of his wife, his 12-year-old daughter, and 2 of his sons. That is what cartel legacy looks like when the protection is gone. The Sinaloa cartel absorbed Tijuana's territory almost immediately. El Chapo and El Mayo had been building toward this moment for years. By the mid-2000s, the Tijuana border crossing that had been the Arellano Felix family's crown jewel was largely under Sinaloa control. The tunnels, the routes, the infrastructure, all of it folded into a cartel that remains, to this day, the most powerful drug trafficking organization in the Western Hemisphere. And then there is the story of the corner, the intersection of Rodolfo T. Loaiza and Gaviotas in the Zona Dorada of Mazatlan, the exact spot where Ramon Arellano Felix and his bodyguard fell, became a stop on what locals call the narco tour. Open-air taxis called pulmonias run routes around the Mazatlan boardwalk, and somewhere in that loop they slow down at that corner. The driver points out through the windshield. Right here, right on this piece of sidewalk. Carnival Sunday, 2002. One of the most wanted men in North America, dead on this exact ground. No plaque, no marker. The story travels the way all real stories in Mexico travel, by word of mouth, from driver to passenger, from one generation of Mazatlan residents to the next. Netflix and Univision both tried to depict Ramon's death in their cartel drama series. Neither of them got it right. The El Chapo series shows him going down during the actual parade. Narcos. Mexico puts him on a scenic highway with an ocean view behind him. The truth is less cinematic, but far more interesting than either version. A Sunday morning reconnaissance drive, a white Volkswagen Beetle going the wrong way down a crowded street, a crew scattering into pharmacies and restaurants, a man with a fake ID trying to pass himself off as a government agent, a dying police officer whose final shot found its mark, and the most feared hitman in Mexican cartel history bleeding out on a tourist strip, while 3 blocks away, the band of music keeps playing and the carnival crowd has no idea what just happened. That gap is what makes this story hit different. Ramon Arellano Felix spent his entire career making sure people felt his presence. He wanted to be feared. He wanted to be known. He wanted rivals to feel his name before they felt anything else. And at the end, he died anonymously, filed under a fake name, claimed by strangers with false paperwork, a body that disappeared before authorities could even confirm who he was. His enemies knew instantly. The government took a month. And the people on the Mazatlan boardwalk that Carnival Sunday never knew that the most dangerous man in Mexico had just taken his last breath around the corner from where they were standing. El Chapo outlived him by almost 20 years, eventually captured in 2016 and extradited to the United States, where he is serving life plus 30 years in ADX Florence, the most secure federal prison in America. El Mayo was arrested in 2024, allegedly tricked onto a plane by one of El Chapo's own sons and flown directly into U.S. custody. The Sinaloa cartel still operates. The Tijuana cartel is a fraction of what it once was, and the war between them, the war that started with a drunk man at a party in Tijuana that ran through nightclubs and airports and courtrooms and prisons across 2 decades, that war ended on a Mazatlan hotel strip on a Sunday morning in February. One wrong turn in a white Volkswagen, one informant who loved his sister more than his boss, one dying police officer with 1 bullet left, one decade-long grudge finally settled. That is how the most feared enforcer in Tijuana cartel history went out. If this video hit, drop a comment. Which version do you believe? the official traffic stop story, or what really went down in that parking lot. And if you want to see the full rise and fall of the Tijuana cartel, that video is coming. Make sure you're subscribed and the bell is on so you don't miss it. We'll see you in the next one.
January 20th, 2020, Aguililla, Michoacán. A joint operation involving the Mexican Army, the National Guard, and Michoacán State Police is closing in on a target. They know who he is. They know what he did. 13 state police officers massacred in a single ambush just 3 months earlier. 13 men wiped out in what survivors described as an absolute killing field, with bodies scattered across the road and burning patrol trucks lighting up the mountain.
The man they're hunting is one of El Mencho's most trusted killers, a cartel commander so close to the top of CJNG that El Mencho personally deployed him to protect his own hometown, Aguililla, Michoacán. The land El Mencho was born in and refused to let any rival cartel touch. And here's the part that makes this story different from every other cartel story you've ever heard. This man, this CJNG killer, who massacred 13 cops, who ordered his crew to flay the faces off rival cartel members and record it on camera, who ran a gang of sicarios through some of the most terrifying violence in modern Mexican cartel history, used to be a circus clown. No cap, a literal circus clown. Painted face, big shoes, making kids laugh under the big tent. His name was Fabian Urbino Morales, and the cartel world knew him as El Payaso, the clown. He kept the mask. He just changed what he used it for. This is the story of how a man who started his life entertaining children in a circus became one of the most feared killers in all of Mexico. The man El Mencho trusted to hold down his birthplace, and how his reign of terror came to an end on January 20th, 2020, when the army finally knocked on the right door. El Payaso wasn't just some low-level street soldier doing runs for the CJNG. This was a man with a direct line to the organization's leadership. He was deployed to Aguililla specifically, El Mencho's hometown, a municipality in Michoacán's Tierra Caliente that CJNG treated like sacred ground. You didn't operate there unless El Mencho trusted you personally. The fact that Fabian Urbino Morales was the man sent to protect that territory tells you everything about how the organization viewed him. But here's what really went down. El Payaso wasn't just a loyal soldier. He was a weapon, the kind of operator that El Mencho recruited because of how he killed people. Not just the fact that he would do it, but the specific, calculated, psychological horror of the way he went about it. CJNG wasn't looking for shooters. They were looking for people who could terrorize an entire region into submission. And El Payaso, with his clown mask and his crew of identically masked sicarios, was exactly that kind of tool. The ambush on October 14th, 2019 didn't just happen. It was the product of years of recruitment, radicalization, and deployment through Mexico's underworld. To understand how El Payaso got to that mountain road with a body count of 13 police officers, we gotta go all the way back to the beginning. To a circus tent somewhere in Mexico, and a young man named Fabian, who had no idea what his life was about to become. Let's rewind to the early 2000s. Fabian Urbino Morales is working a legitimate job. Born around 1982 or 1983, possibly in the state of Chiapas, according to some sources, he's a young man from a humble background making a living the only way he knows how, performing. He's working the circus circuit, doing clown acts, entertaining crowds at events and functions. He's got a nickname that he earns from his work, El Payaso, the clown. At this point in his life, the name just means what it says. Now, the details of exactly when or how Fabian crossed over into the cartel world aren't fully documented publicly. What we do know is that his entry point was family. His brother, known by the aliases El Jaguar or El Burro Gris, was a former military man who had already crossed over into organized crime and joined CJNG's elite Delta group. El Jaguar was operating as a lieutenant in Aguililla, Michoacán, giving him serious rank inside the organization. When your brother is already that deep in, and you're coming from poverty, the door to that world opens fast. Fabian didn't walk through that door alone. He went in with a mindset shaped by the circus, the understanding of how to perform, how to project a persona, how to make people feel something. But now the performance was terror, not entertainment. And the costume he kept wasn't the full clown suit. It was the mask. He started his criminal career working under El Jaguar's structure in Aguililla. But here's where it gets crazy. Fabian didn't just follow orders and stay in his lane. He gravitated toward one of the most extreme cells operating in that part of Mexico, a group called Los Metros. Now, before we get into Los Metros, let's talk about what Aguililla actually represented in the CJNG world, because this is important to understand the rest of the story. Aguililla, Michoacán, is a small municipality deep in the Tierra Caliente, the hot land, a mountainous region along the border of Michoacán and Jalisco. It's avocado farming country. It's also where Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, El Mencho, was born and raised. CJNG treated Aguililla like royal territory. The idea of any rival cartel having a foothold there was completely unacceptable to El Mencho on a personal level. This was the land he came from. Whatever happened elsewhere in Mexico, Aguililla stayed CJNG, period. That context matters because it tells you why El Mencho cared so personally about who he put in charge of that plaza. Now, Los Metros originally came out of Tamaulipas, on the other side of the country, a faction that had roots in the Gulf Cartel before eventually aligning itself with CJNG. And Los Metros had a reputation, not just for killing, but for how they killed. They were executing rivals by burning them alive in gasoline drums. They were using chemical methods to destroy bodies. They were documenting their violence on camera and circulating the footage deliberately, not as a mistake, but as a message. This was psychological warfare dressed up as murder, and Fabian Urbino Morales fit right in. He built his own crew of clown-masked sicarios within the Los Metros structure. Multiple killers wearing identical clown masks, moving through Tamaulipas and eventually Michoacán as a unit. Reports from Tamaulipas confirmed that CJNG-aligned gunmen were being seen posting videos of themselves in clown masks as early as this period, wearing full tactical gear with those painted faces underneath the body armor. It was one of the most disturbing tactical aesthetics anyone had seen in the Mexican drug war up to that point. And on his social media accounts, which he ran publicly, with what can only be described as a cartel boss's arrogance, Fabian switched from posting circus photos to posting himself with weapons. Gold-plated .38 super pistol, designer clothes, luxury sneakers. He was proud of and not hiding from anyone. This is important because it shows you what kind of person El Payaso was. He wasn't operating in the shadows. He was performing. The same instinct that made him work the crowd in a circus was now driving him to brand himself as one of the most recognizable and feared sicarios in CJNG. He wanted people to know who he was. He wanted the mask to mean something. El Mencho noticed. Here's where the story shifts from regional sicario to personal asset of the most wanted man in Mexico. When El Mencho heard about the way El Payaso and his crew were executing rivals, burning bodies in drums, flaying faces, recording it, and putting it online, he didn't flinch. He recruited him directly. El Mencho's entire philosophy was built on strategic, performative violence. The kind of violence that doesn't just kill an enemy, it makes every other enemy in a 100-mile radius reconsider their life choices. El Payaso wasn't just willing to do that, he had already been doing it on his own. CJNG brought Fabian Urbino Morales into the fold under the command structure of a regional CJNG lieutenant named Miguel Fernandez, who went by the alias LM2. LM2 was running CJNG operations in Aguililla and the surrounding Tierra Caliente area, the mountainous, hot climate region straddling Michoacán and Jalisco. that had become one of the most violently contested pieces of territory in all of Mexico. The Tierra Caliente is where the avocado money flows, where the drug cooking labs hide in the mountains, and where CJNG was locked in a brutal war with a coalition of rival groups called the United Cartels, which included La Familia Michoacana and Los Viagras. Only Fabian was sent to Aguililla itself. His broader Los Metros crew stayed in Tamaulipas. El Mencho specifically deployed his best clown-masked killer to hold down the land where El Mencho was born. Think about that. Out of everyone in CJNG's massive organization, out of every sicario, every commander, every regional boss, El Payaso was the one trusted with Aguililla. And El Payaso used that trust to run one of the most brutal intimidation campaigns in Michoacan's recent history. He wasn't just killing rivals. His crew was capturing members of La Familia Michoacana, torturing them on camera, and releasing the footage. One video that circulated on Borderland Beat and other narco-tracking platforms showed a victim, widely believed to be a La Familia Michoacana member, with his face completely and methodically flayed. Skin removed, lips gone, eyelids gone. The man was still alive in the footage, making sounds that people who watched it described as something they couldn't unhear. El Payaso was present during these sessions. The torture was his work. This is the environment he was running in the months before October 2019. Aguililla was his plaza. He was holding it for El Mencho with maximum force and maximum brutality, and the war with the United Cartels was escalating to a breaking point. But that's not even the crazy part. The October 14th attack that finally brought El Payaso down happened on the same day, the exact same day, that Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador was receiving a security briefing in the National Palace in Mexico City, where his cabinet was presenting their current law enforcement results to the president. Almost 600 kilometers away, El Payaso's crew was setting up the ambush that would make every word of that briefing irrelevant. The CJNG had been tracking the movements of a Michoacán state police convoy operating in El Aguaje, a small township inside Aguililla that CJNG considered part of their protected territory. The accusation CJNG was making, according to narco messages left at the scene, was that these officers were working for the United Cartels. Whether that was true or not, almost, doesn't matter to understand why the attack happened. What matters is that CJNG, and El Payaso specifically, decided to send a message that nobody who entered their territory uninvited would leave standing. The trap was laid. The convoy drove into it. October 14th, 2019. A convoy of Michoacán state police officers is moving through El Aguaje, a small, rural community tucked into the mountains of Aguililla municipality. It's broad daylight. These are uniformed officers in state police vehicles, conducting what should have been a routine operation. El Aguaje sits inside a municipality that CJNG has been declaring their own with increasing aggression, roadblocks, narco messages, intimidation of local residents. CJNG has been signaling for months that anyone who enters this territory works for them or doesn't leave it. The state police convoy either didn't know that or thought their uniforms and badges changed the calculation. They didn't. El Payaso's crew was already in position. The CJNG unit had set up an ambush with military precision, multiple firing positions, cover on multiple sides, coordinated to cut off any escape route for the convoy. When the attack started, it was immediate and overwhelming. Police officers never had a position to fight from. Audio leaked from survivors, and emergency calls makes the chaos completely clear. You can hear officers screaming, "They took us all down." You hear a voice saying, "I'm dying." The shooting doesn't stop. The patrol trucks were set on fire. The kill zone was total. When it was over, 13 Michoacán state police officers were dead. 9 more were wounded. The CJNG left narco messages at the scene accusing the dead officers of being United Cartel collaborators. It was the single deadliest attack on police in Michoacán in recent memory. and one of the bloodiest single engagements in the state's modern history. The aftermath photos showed burned patrol vehicles and officers' bodies in the road. The images went nationally viral within hours. Every major Mexican newspaper led with it. The federal government was forced to respond publicly. This wasn't something that could be managed quietly. 13 uniformed state police officers killed in an ambush was a national crisis. Mexican President López Obrador called it very regrettable. The Michoacán Secretary of Public Security confirmed the full death toll. Federal forces were immediately mobilized to reinforce Aguililla, and behind the scenes, investigators started working backward, tracing the attack through the CJNG command structure in that region, following the chain of command up through LM2's organization until they got to the man who ran the operation on the ground, El Payaso. But El Mencho's man in Aguililla didn't run. He stayed in the area. Maybe he felt untouchable. He'd been operating openly in Aguililla for months, holding the plaza with total impunity. And his boss was the most hunted man in Mexico who had still never been caught. Maybe he calculated that the heat would pass. Maybe he just didn't have enough of a warning. Whatever the reason, when the Army and the National Guard came back to Aguililla 3 months later, in January 2020, El Payaso was still there. By January 2020, federal and state investigators had built their case. They had identified Fabian Urbino Morales as one of the key commanders under LM2 who directed the October 14th ambush. They knew he was still in the Aguililla area. They had his identity confirmed, including the connection to his brother El Jaguar, the former Delta Group military man who had been one of El Payaso's original entry points into CJNG. On January 20th, 2020, a joint operation involving elements of the Michoacán Police, the Mexican Army, and the National Guard moved on the target location. This wasn't a small sweep. This was a coordinated multi-agency takedown built specifically around bringing in Fabian Urbino Morales. The operation succeeded. El Payaso was arrested along with 10 other cartel members who were taken into custody at the same time. No dramatic last stand. No helicopter pursuit through mountains. The man who had ordered the slaughter of 13 police officers, who had run a crew of clown-masked sicarios through some of the most disturbing violence in Michoacán's history, was taken off the streets in a coordinated military sweep 3 months after his biggest operation. The official charge, Tiki, Wainakwi Swarpers, participation in the armed attack that killed 13 Michoacán state police officers on October 14, 2019. What happened in the investigation afterward tells you how El Payaso fit into the broader CJNG structure. Investigators confirmed he was operating directly under LM2's command structure, and that LM2 himself had been captured on audio, recorded giving the order for the sicarios to kill the police officers and instructing them to leave a narco message at the scene. LM2 was identified as a major asset to the CJNG organization, and his capture and the capture of El Payaso were described as significant blows to CJNG's operations in Michoacán. What also came out in the investigation was a clearer picture of exactly how El Payaso had been running his operation in Aguililla. He wasn't just responding to threats. He was proactively running a terror campaign designed to break the civilian population's will to resist CJNG authority. Any local farmer, business owner, or resident suspected of passing information to rival groups or to police was a target. Any rival cartel member who showed up in CJNG territory was a target. And the methodology wasn't just execution, it was publicized, documented execution designed to circulate online and reinforce the message that CJNG's grip on Aguililla was absolute. The arrest also revealed something about how El Payaso had been living during his time as plaza boss. According to Mexican media reports, before he became a target, he was openly posting on social media, flexing weapons, cash, and designer goods under his own identity with essentially zero effort to conceal himself. That level of public arrogance is a signature of CJNG commanders who feel completely protected by the organization's reach. They operate with the assumption that nobody is going to come for them because of who they work for. El Payaso felt invincible in Aguililla, and for months after the October 14th massacre, he was right. 3 months of complete impunity in the town, where he had just killed 13 police officers. The only thing that ended it was a determined multi-agency operation with federal military backing. But here's where it gets real about what the arrest actually changed and what it didn't. On the streets, CJNG didn't stop fighting. The war for Aguililla continued. By April 2021, CJNG was attacking Michoacan police with explosive drones. Drone bombs rigged with explosives dropped on officers who were trying to clear CJNG roadblocks outside the city. A BBC report confirmed the drone attack wounded 2 officers. The tactic was unprecedented. Cartel warfare had evolved to the point where they were running drone bombing campaigns against police, in the same town where El Payaso had run his ambushes just 18 months earlier. And El Mencho himself, the man who had personally trusted El Payaso enough to make him Aguililla's gatekeeper, remained completely free. He would remain untouchable for another 6 years after El Payaso's arrest, right up until the pre-dawn raid in Tapalpa, Jalisco, on February 22nd, 2026, that finally killed him. As for Fabian Urbino Morales, the circus clown who became a cartel killer, is reportedly still in Mexican federal prison. And according to one Mexican narco news outlet, the only performances he gives now are clown shows inside the prison walls. El Payaso's story changed how Mexico and the world understood CJNG's recruitment model and what made the cartel so uniquely dangerous. Every other major cartel in Mexico recruited from specific pipelines. Former military men, street-level gang members, people with existing criminal networks. CJNG did all of that. But they also actively sought out the most psychologically extreme individuals available regardless of background. El Payaso's story proves it. A circus clown from humble origins who had no traditional cartel connections except a brother in the organization, and El Mencho personally elevated him to plaza boss of his own hometown because of how he committed violence. That's the CJNG model in one story. El Mencho wasn't just building an army, he was curating a collection of the most tactically brutal human beings available in the Mexican underworld, dressing them up in paramilitary structure and pointing them at whatever needed to be destroyed. The other thing El Payaso's story reveals about CJNG is the role of documentation in their strategy. His crew wasn't just committing violence, they were filming it, packaging it, and circulating it deliberately. The torture video, the clown mask aesthetics on social media, El Payaso's own posts showing off weapons and cash. This is a cartel that understood media and understood how fear travels through digital networks. El Mencho had built an organization that used social media the way a PR department uses press releases, except the content was footage of atrocities designed to make rivals, civilians, and law enforcement understand the cost of resistance. El Payaso was one of the most active practitioners of that strategy within CJNG's ranks. The clown mask was his brand. And that brand spread fear across Tamaulipas, Michoacan, and eventually internationally once the footage started circulating on narco monitoring platforms and eventually mainstream news channels covering cartel violence. And then there's the professional clown community's response, which sounds almost absurd in context, but is actually a legitimate part of this story. When El Payaso's identity and methods became widely known, professional clowns in Mexico publicly condemned the use of clown imagery in cartel violence. They held press events distancing the profession from what Fabian Urbino Morales had done with the costume they shared. The fact that a drug cartel sicario had so thoroughly weaponized the aesthetic of a children's entertainer that working clowns felt the need to formally disavow any association tells you something about the cultural footprint El Payaso left behind. The clown mask angle isn't just a wild detail for a documentary thumbnail. It was functional psychological warfare. When residents of Aguililla or Tamaulipas saw armed men in clown masks rolling through their streets on pickup trucks with rifles. The effect was exactly what El Payaso intended. It was wrong in a way that short-circuits normal human processing. Your brain sees a clown and expects comedy. It gets a weapon instead. That dissonance is terror on a neurological level. El Payaso understood that before he ever fired a shot. He learned it performing. The October 14th ambush he orchestrated became a reference point for how aggressively CJNG was willing to engage the state. 13 officers dead in a single operation in El Mencho's own hometown was a deliberate message to the Mexican government. CJNG controlled that territory and would massacre anyone who entered it without permission. The audacity of doing it the same day the president was receiving a security briefing wasn't a coincidence. These organizations track government movements and time their statements accordingly. What El Payaso's arrest represented in the bigger picture was a crack in CJNG's armor in Michoacán. LM2 was compromised. El Payaso was gone. The leadership structure El Mencho had built to hold Aguililla was fractured. But CJNG's response, drone bombs, roadblocks, continued warfare, showed that even with key commanders arrested, the organization had the depth to keep fighting. Taking out El Payaso didn't take out CJNG in Michoacán. It just made them angrier. Today, Aguililla is still a contested zone. The Tierra Caliente has been one of the most violently fought over regions in Mexico for years, and that hasn't changed since El Payaso went to prison. La Familia Michoacana is still operating. Los Viagras still exist. The United Cartels coalition CJNG was fighting in 2019 hasn't disappeared. What changed is that the man El Mencho sent to hold that ground is now behind bars, and El Mencho himself is dead. Killed in February 2026 in a military operation just like the ones his own cartels had been massacring for a decade. El Payaso's legacy, if you can call it that, is the story of how CJNG turned a circus clown into a weapon of mass psychological terror, and how that weapon eventually got picked up and put back down by the same government it had been tearing apart. The mask was memorable enough that his story spread internationally. People who cover the Mexican drug war still reference El Payaso when they talk about CJNG's approach to intimidation because nothing in the cartel world before him had that specific combination of absurdity and horror. A clown who makes you laugh is harmless. A clown with an RPG and a video camera who has just killed 13 cops and is still holding the plaza 3 months later is something entirely different. Mexico spent a decade learning that lesson about CJNG as an organization. El Payaso was one of the most extreme individual expressions of it. And somewhere in a Mexican federal prison right now, Fabian Urbino Morales is reportedly still doing his clown act, just for a very different audience than the one he started with. The big tent is gone. The costume is gone. The mask that meant so much to his criminal persona is gone. What's left is a man who made some of the most consequential and devastating choices in Michoacán's recent history, and is now living with those choices inside a cell. The 13 officers who died on October 14, 2019 in El Aguaje left behind families, wives, children, parents, people who got a phone call that afternoon telling them their husband or their father or their son wasn't coming home from a routine patrol in the mountains. That's the human cost sitting at the center of El Payaso's story that can get lost when you focus on the spectacle of the clown mask and the cartel theatrics. 13 people died on that road because Fabian Urbino Morales decided their lives were less important than holding a plaza for El Mencho. And El Mencho, the man he was holding it for, is dead too now. Killed by the Mexican military in a pre-dawn raid in February 2026. The empire El Payaso helped protect from a prison cell is now leaderless, fracturing, and fighting itself. The war El Payaso was a soldier and ended with his commander dying on a military helicopter, bleeding out over the mountains of Jalisco. 59 years old and running from soldiers through the forest of his own hiding spot. The circus for El Payaso is finally over, and so is the organization he gave everything to protect. Picture this: a former Olympic snowboarder turned international drug kingpin with a $15 million bounty on his head, sitting in a luxury hideout somewhere in Mexico. The FBI chief compared him to El Chapo himself, calling Ryan Wedding one of the most dangerous fugitives they had ever hunted. But here is what nobody saw coming. Instead of going down in a blaze of gunfire like most cartel leaders, Wedding did something that shocked law enforcement worldwide. He walked into the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City and surrendered. But what happened in those final 24 hours before he made that decision? What was going through his mind as he prepared to face life in prison? And why did this man, who had evaded international law enforcement for years, suddenly decide to give up his freedom? Today we are going to break down Ryan Wedding's entire criminal empire, examine his rise to the FBI Most Wanted list, and reveal the shocking events that led to his surrender. We will explore his final Instagram posts, the role his girlfriend played in his decision, and the calculated moves he made before walking into that embassy. Stay until the end because the real story behind his surrender will completely change how you see this case. Ryan James Wedding was not your typical drug lord. He was a man who once represented Canada at the 2002 Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City, competing in snowboard cross. But somewhere between the slopes of Olympic glory and the streets of international drug trafficking, Wedding transformed into what federal prosecutors would later call one of the most significant drug trafficking threats to North America. To understand the magnitude of Wedding's final 24 hours, you need to grasp the empire he was about to abandon. According to federal indictments, Wedding did not just run a drug operation. He orchestrated a multinational criminal network that would make seasoned cartel leaders take notice. Wedding's organization was not dealing in small quantities when it came to moving multi-kilogram shipments of cocaine. They moved hundreds of kilograms at a time. Federal prosecutors alleged his network transported over 1,800 kilograms of cocaine, nearly 4,000 pounds of pure product. To put it in perspective, that quantity has a street value exceeding $200 million. This was a massive operation. The operation worked like a well-oiled machine. Cocaine originated from South American suppliers, moved through Mexico, and then was distributed across Canada and the United States. Wedding's network had the infrastructure to handle massive shipments, with sophisticated logistics that rivaled legitimate international businesses. What made Wedding particularly dangerous was how he operated across Canada, the United States, and Mexico. His network spanned 3 countries seamlessly. In Mexico, he maintained connections with established cartels and used the country as both a transit point and an eventual hiding place. In the United States, major distribution networks moved product to cities across the country. Canada served as his home base where he maintained legitimate business fronts and family connections. This 3-country operation required incredible coordination, trusted personnel in multiple countries, and the ability to navigate different legal systems and law enforcement agencies. Moving drugs is only half the battle. You need to clean the money. Wedding's organization employed complex money laundering schemes that federal investigators spent years unraveling. The operation used front companies, legitimate businesses that served as covers for drug money. They employed couriers, trusted individuals who physically transported cash across borders. The network relied on intermediaries and third parties who helped obscure the money trail. And it used international banking with complex financial transactions across multiple countries. The money laundering operation was so sophisticated that it took federal investigators years to trace the financial networks. They discovered that Wedding's organization had laundered tens of millions of dollars through various schemes, all tied to drug proceeds from their massive cocaine distribution network. But Wedding's empire wasn't just about moving drugs and money. Federal prosecutors alleged that his organization was responsible for multiple murders, including the killing of 2 family members in Ontario, Canada. This wasn't just business, it was personal, and it was violent. The indictment painted a picture of an organization willing to use extreme violence to protect its interests. When people crossed Wedding's network, the consequences were often fatal. This level of violence is what ultimately put him on the FBI radar as a priority target. By 2024, Ryan Wedding had become more than just another drug dealer on law enforcement's radar. The FBI elevated him to their 10 most wanted fugitives list, a designation reserved for the most dangerous criminals in the world. This wasn't just about drug trafficking anymore. This was about a man who had become a threat to international security. The FBI 10 Most Wanted list is exclusive territory. Since its creation in 1950, only 529 people have made this list. Being added means you have crossed a line from regular criminal to someone law enforcement considers a clear and present danger to public safety. When the FBI announced Wedding's addition to the Most Wanted list, they did something that immediately caught international attention. They placed a $15 million reward on his head. This was not just any reward. This was one of the largest bounties ever offered by U.S. law enforcement for a drug trafficking case. To understand the significance of this amount, consider that most FBI rewards range from $100,000 to $1 million. A $15 million reward puts Wedding in the same category as international terrorists and the most dangerous criminals in the world. The FBI was sending a clear message. They wanted Ryan Wedding, and they were willing to pay unprecedented sums to get him. Perhaps the most telling moment came when FBI officials began comparing Wedding to Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the notorious Mexican cartel leader. This was not hyperbole. This was law enforcement's way of communicating just how dangerous they considered Wedding to be. El Chapo became the point of reference. Like El Chapo, Wedding had built an international drug trafficking empire, evaded law enforcement for years, used violence to maintain control, operated across multiple countries, and corrupted officials and systems. The comparison mattered because El Chapo had been considered one of the most powerful drug lords in history before his capture and conviction. With Wedding on the FBI's Most Wanted list, the pressure was not just coming from U.S. law enforcement. International agencies began coordinating efforts. Canadian authorities intensified their search because of Wedding's citizenship and family connections. Mexican law enforcement faced pressure to locate and apprehend him. Interpol issued international notices, and financial intelligence units across multiple countries began tracking potential money flows. This level of international coordination meant that Wedding's world was shrinking rapidly. Every day he remained free, the net closed tighter around him. By late 2024, Ryan Wedding found himself in a position that every fugitive eventually faces. The walls were closing in, and his options were disappearing fast. Let's examine the 3 critical factors that were weighing on his mind during those final weeks before his surrender. Wedding was not facing a few years in prison, or even a decade behind bars when considering the life-level federal charges against him. The federal charges carried potential life sentences. The indictment included conspiracy to distribute cocaine, money laundering charges, continuing criminal enterprise known as the Kingpin Statute, and murder conspiracy charges. Under federal sentencing guidelines, these charges could result in multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. At 43 years old, Wedding was looking at spending the rest of his life in a federal penitentiary. That massive reward was not just a number. $15 million on the table made every person he met a potential threat. Former allies, family members, even romantic partners could be tempted by that kind of money. With that reward, Wedding could not trust anyone. The reward turned his own network into his biggest threat. People who had once protected him now had a financial incentive to betray him. This kind of psychological pressure breaks even the strongest criminals. Wedding was not just hiding from local police or even federal agents. He was under intense international pressure as the target of a coordinated international manhunt involving FBI agents and task forces, Canadian law enforcement, Mexican authorities, Interpol, financial intelligence agencies, and international informant networks. Criminal psychology experts have identified three inevitable realities that every high-profile fugitive eventually confronts, and Wedding was experiencing all three at once. When you are on the FBI's most wanted list with $15 million as a reward, the movement becomes extremely risky. Wedding could not use his real identity for travel, stay in one location for extended periods, trust new people or locations, access his legitimate financial resources, or communicate freely with family or associates. Every day brought new risks. Every person he encountered could be the one to turn him in. This level of paranoia and isolation takes a severe psychological toll. The people and systems that had protected Wedding for years began to crumble under pressure as his protection network started collapsing. Associates were being arrested and potentially cooperating. Financial resources were being frozen or seized. Safe houses were being compromised. Corrupt officials were distancing themselves, and family members were under surveillance. As these networks collapsed, Wedding's world became smaller and far more dangerous. Perhaps the most crushing realization for any fugitive is understanding that arrest becomes inevitable. Wedding had to confront the mathematical reality that with unlimited resources, international cooperation, and a $15 million incentive, law enforcement would eventually find him. The question was not whether he would be caught. It was whether he would be taken alive or dead, and whether he would have any control over the circumstances of his capture. In what might be one of the most bizarre moves in fugitive history, Ryan Wedding decided to create an Instagram account during his final weeks as a fugitive. This was not just any social media presence. This was a calculated attempt to control his narrative before law enforcement could define it for him. Wedding's Instagram posts painted a picture of a man living without fear or regret. He posted images of expensive watches and jewelry, luxury cars and motorcycles, high-end restaurants and locations, and designer clothing and accessories. But these were not just vanity posts. Criminal behavior experts suggest that Wedding was attempting to project an image of success and control. By showing luxury items, he was communicating several messages. He was not hiding in fear. He still had access to significant resources. He was living life on his own terms. He was not broken by the pressure. The Instagram account served multiple purposes beyond just showing off wealth. Wedding was playing a sophisticated psychological game with law enforcement and the public. First, he was exercising narrative control. By posting his own content, he could shape how people saw him before his inevitable capture. Second, the posts might have been intended as misdirection, to throw off investigators about his location or resources. Third, demonstrating that he still had resources and connections could serve as a negotiation tool useful in eventual plea negotiations. Finally, like many criminals before him, Wedding wanted legacy management. He wanted to control how he would be remembered. Perhaps the most humanizing element of Wedding's final days was the role his girlfriend played in his decision to surrender. Sources close to the investigation say she became the voice of reason in his increasingly chaotic world. Living as a fugitive is not just hard on the person running, it is devastating for their loved ones. Wedding's girlfriend lived in constant fear of violent arrest or assassination, isolation from family and friends, an inability to live a normal life, and severe psychological stress from the uncertainty. She began pressuring Wedding to consider surrender as a way to end the nightmare for both of them. While Wedding may have been caught up in the adrenaline and defiance of being on the run, his girlfriend offered a crucial outside perspective. She could see what he might have been blind to. The situation was unsustainable. The risks were escalating daily. A peaceful surrender was better than a violent capture, and they had no real future while he remained a fugitive. Sources say his girlfriend played a decisive role in his final choice. She helped him understand that surrender was not defeat. It was taking control of an impossible situation. Her influence may well have been the deciding factor that led him to choose the embassy over continuing to run. During his final weeks as a fugitive, Ryan Wedding was constantly on the move throughout Mexico. This was not just paranoia. It was a survival strategy based on the reality of his situation. If the FBI or Mexican authorities had located Wedding through traditional law enforcement methods, the arrest would likely have been violent and dangerous. Consider what typically happens when authorities locate a most wanted fugitive. Heavily armed tactical teams conduct the arrest. The fugitive might resist or attempt to flee. Innocent bystanders could be endangered, and the fugitive has no control over the circumstances. Wedding understood that if law enforcement found him before he was ready, the situation could turn deadly very quickly. To avoid detection, Wedding employed a strategy of constantly changing locations. He never stayed in one place for more than a few days, used different safe houses across Mexico, avoided patterns that investigators could track, and maintained multiple escape routes from each location. This constant movement was exhausting and stressful, but it was necessary for survival. Even while living as a fugitive, Wedding was preparing for his eventual legal battle. This preparation was crucial to his surrender strategy. Wedding made contact with high-profile criminal defense attorneys who specialized in international drug trafficking cases. This was not just about getting representation. It was about understanding his legal options, preparing for potential plea negotiations, ensuring his rights would be protected, and developing a defense strategy. Wedding and his legal team began preparing the documentation and narrative that would accompany his surrender. This included statements about his voluntary surrender, claims of innocence, requests for fair treatment, and preparation for media coverage. Before surrendering, Wedding had to secure his personal belongings and any evidence that might be helpful to his defense. This included financial documents, communication records, personal items of value, and anything that might support his eventual defense. In the hours before his surrender, Ryan Wedding made one final Instagram post that would shock law enforcement and the public alike. This was not just a social media update. It was a carefully crafted public relations move designed to frame his surrender on his own terms. Wedding's final Instagram post contained several key elements. He emphasized that he was turning himself in voluntarily, not being captured. He maintained his innocence of all charges and called for a fair legal process. He expressed confidence that the truth would eventually come out, and he framed the surrender as his decision on his terms. The timing of this post was crucial. By announcing his intentions on social media before approaching authorities, Wedding accomplished several things. He created a public record of his voluntary surrender and generated media attention that could influence public perception. He established his narrative before law enforcement could control the story, and he demonstrated that he was surrendering from a position of choice, not desperation. Wedding's choice to surrender at the United States Embassy in Mexico City was strategically brilliant. This was not a random decision. It was a calculated move that offered several advantages. The United States Embassy provided Wedding with several benefits. Embassies are considered sovereign United States territory, providing a controlled and neutral environment. Embassy surrenders generate significant media coverage, and the surrender would follow diplomatic protocols rather than law enforcement raids. The embassy offered safety with reduced risk of violence compared to a street arrest, and Wedding could walk in on his own terms rather than being dragged out of a hideout, giving him control over the situation. By choosing the embassy, Wedding was sending a clear message. He was not running anymore and was ready to face the United States legal system. He was surrendering as a matter of choice, not capture, and he wanted the process to be civilized and diplomatic. The actual surrender process unfolded exactly as Wedding had planned. Mexican authorities took custody of him at the embassy. and he was peacefully transferred to United States custody without incident. Unlike most high-profile fugitive captures, there were no SWAT team raids, no shootouts or violence, no high-speed chases, and no dramatic arrest footage. Instead, Wedding walked into the embassy, identified himself, and was processed through official diplomatic channels. This peaceful surrender stood in stark contrast to how most international drug fugitives are captured. El Chapo was captured in violent raids multiple times. Other cartel leaders often die in shootouts with authorities, and most fugitives are taken by surprise in dramatic operations. Wedding's surrender was almost anticlimactic in its civility. From the moment of his surrender, Wedding has maintained a consistent position regarding the charges against him. He has been clear and unwavering. He maintains complete innocence, stating, "I did not do what they are accusing me of." He has not pleaded guilty to any charges and has made no admissions of wrongdoing. He emphasizes his right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty. This consistent message of innocence serves several legal purposes. It preserves all legal options for his defense and avoids statements that could be used against him. It maintains the possibility of plea negotiations and keeps public opinion open to his version of events. Wedding's innocence claims are not just legal strategy, they are also public relations. By maintaining innocence, he keeps his story in the media, maintains support from family and friends, preserves the possibility of public sympathy, and challenges the government to prove their case. Wedding's voluntary surrender sent shockwaves through the law enforcement community. FBI agents and international investigators had been preparing for a violent confrontation or a years-long manhunt. Instead, they received a phone call from the U.S. Embassy saying their most wanted fugitive had just walked in. In the history of the FBI Most Wanted list, voluntary surrenders are extremely rare. Most fugitives on this list are captured in violent raids, killed while resisting arrest, found dead by suicide, or caught after years of investigation. Wedding's peaceful surrender was so unusual that it required law enforcement to completely change their approach to his case. Wedding's surrender also had immediate impacts on the ongoing investigation. Other suspects in his network faced increased pressure. Investigators had to shift from manhunt mode to prosecution preparation. International cooperation efforts were redirected, and the $15 million reward was no longer needed. With Wedding now in custody, the focus shifts to what promises to be one of the most significant drug trafficking prosecutions in recent years. Wedding faces a massive federal indictment that includes conspiracy to distribute cocaine with a possible life sentence, money laundering with up to 20 years per count, continuing criminal enterprise with a mandatory life sentence, and murder conspiracy with a possible life sentence. If convicted on all counts, Wedding could face multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. Life is the core exposure he now faces. Wedding's legal team faces an enormous challenge. They must challenge the evidence against him, question the credibility of cooperating witnesses, argue that he was not the leader prosecutors claim he was, and potentially negotiate a plea deal that avoids life sentences. Federal prosecutors have spent years building their case against Wedding. They likely have wiretapped communications, financial records showing money laundering, cooperating witnesses from his organization, physical evidence from drug seizures, and international intelligence cooperation. Wedding's case has implications that extend far beyond his individual prosecution. It highlights the global nature of modern international drug trafficking. Operations span multiple countries. Criminals use sophisticated financial networks. International cooperation is essential for prosecution, and technology plays a crucial role in both crime and investigation. Wedding's background as an Olympic athlete adds a unique dimension to his case. It challenges assumptions about who becomes involved in drug trafficking, highlights how legitimate achievements can be overshadowed by criminal activity, and raises questions about the pressures and opportunities that elite athletes face. Assumptions are part of the story. Wedding's use of Instagram during his time as a fugitive represents a new phenomenon in criminal behavior. We are seeing fugitives use social media to control their narrative. The intersection of traditional crime and modern technology, and the role of public relations in criminal cases. Social control changed the dynamics. Ryan Wedding's last 24 hours as a fugitive represent one of the most calculated and strategic surrenders in criminal history. From his Instagram posts to his choice of the U.S. Embassy, every decision was designed to give him maximum control over an impossible situation. Calculated choices defined those hours. Looking back at Wedding's final moves, several elements stand out as strategically brilliant. He used social media to control his narrative, and he chose a peaceful surrender rather than violent capture. He maintained claims of innocence throughout, leveraged his girlfriend's influence to make key decisions, and selected the embassy as a neutral and safe surrender location. Peaceful surrender was central. Beyond the strategy and calculation, Wedding's story is ultimately human. It is about a man who built an empire, faced impossible odds, and ultimately chose to surrender rather than die as a fugitive. His girlfriend's influence reminds us that even the most hardened criminals are still human beings with relationships and emotions. Human elements remain. Wedding's surrender raises as many questions as it answers. Will he eventually cooperate with authorities? What evidence do prosecutors really have against him? How will his claims of innocence hold up in court? What impact will his surrender have on his criminal network? Questions linger. Wedding's case sends several important messages. To other fugitives, sometimes surrender is the smartest option. To law enforcement, even the most wanted criminals can surprise you. To the public, the reality of criminal life is far more complex than movies suggest. Messages are clear and complicated. As Ryan Wedding sits in federal custody awaiting trial, his story is far from over. The legal battle ahead will determine whether his strategic surrender was brilliant or futile. Regardless of the outcome, his last 24 hours as a fugitive will be remembered as one of the most calculated and unprecedented surrenders in criminal history, remembered for its uniqueness. The man who was once compared to El Chapo chose a different path than the notorious cartel leader. Instead of going down fighting, Wedding walked into an embassy and faced his fate in a courtroom. Whether that decision was wise or foolish will ultimately be determined by a jury of his peers. Chose a different path. One thing is certain: Ryan Wedding's transformation from Olympic snowboarder to international fugitive to voluntary surrender will be studied by law enforcement, criminal defense attorneys, and criminologists for years to come. His story represents a unique chapter in the ongoing war against international drug trafficking, and a reminder that even in the darkest criminal enterprises, human choice and redemption remain possible. Studied for its lessons. You know the stories of cartel violence in Mexico, businessmen extorted, families threatened, empires built on fear. But what if I told you about a man who said no? A man who lost $2 billion of cartel money and refused to pay a single peso in extortion, even when he knew they were coming for him? Meet Alberto Prieto Valencia, grain merchant, logistics mogul, father, a man who chose morals over survival. Today we dive into his final 24 hours, the unusual movements that preceded his death, and why standing up to the cartels cost him everything. This is the story of Alberto Prieto, and it's one you won't forget. Alberto Prieto Valencia wasn't born into the narco world. He was born into commerce, into the grinding, honest work of Mexico's merchant class. For decades, he built his empire in Guadalajara and Zapopan, operating out of the Mercado de Abastos, one of the largest wholesale markets in Latin America. His business was simple but essential: grains and cereals, the staples that feed a nation. From those humble beginnings in the market stalls, Alberto expanded. He saw opportunity where others saw only sacks of corn and wheat. He founded Transports Odal, a transportation and logistics company that operated refrigerated trucks and dry van fleets across Mexico. His trucks moved goods from coast to coast, through cartel territories, through checkpoints, through the invisible borders that divide Mexico into kingdoms of violence. Alberto became wealthy. Not cartel wealthy, but legitimate wealthy. The kind of wealth that comes from decades of 6-day work weeks, from knowing your suppliers, from building relationships, from understanding that in Mexico, your word is your bond. He drove a Lamborghini Urus, midnight black, 641 horsepower, worth over $200,000. In Guadalajara, that car was a statement. It said, "I made it." It also said, "I'm a target." But Alberto wasn't naive. He traveled with armed security, ex-military men who knew how to handle weapons, who understood tactical formations, who were paid to die before their principal did. That was Alberto's life. Businessman by day, protected asset by night, walking the razor's edge between success and survival, in a country where the two are often mutually exclusive. What does a typical day look like for a man like Alberto Prieto? He wakes early, 5:30 a.m. Before the sun burns off the Guadalajara smog. His home is in an upscale neighborhood, the kind with high walls and security cameras. Coffee, black, strong. He checks his phone. Messages from his warehouse managers, his drivers, his accountants. In the logistics business, problems don't wait for business hours. A truck breaks down in Sinaloa. A shipment is delayed at a checkpoint in Michoacan. A client needs an emergency delivery to Mexico City. By 7 a.m., he's at the Mercado de Abastos. The market is already alive. Forklifts moving pallets, vendors shouting prices, the smell of fresh produce mixing with diesel exhaust. This is where Alberto built his fortune, and he never forgot it. He walks the aisles. He shakes hands. He checks inventory personally. How's the corn shipment from Jalisco? Did the refrigerated truck make it to Monterrey on time? What's the price on black beans this week? Details. In business, details are everything. By mid-morning, he's in his office at Transport Sodal, meetings with clients, negotiations with suppliers, reviewing routes. In Mexico, logistics isn't just about efficiency, it's about safety. Which roads are controlled by which cartels? Which checkpoints require cooperation? Which routes have seen violence in the past week? Alberto knows all of this. He has to. Lunch is often at the market. Tacos from a vendor he's known for 20 years. Carne asada, cilantro, lime, simple food, honest food. Afternoons are for paperwork, invoices, contracts, payroll. He employs dozens of people, drivers, warehouse workers, mechanics, office staff. Their families depend on him. By evening, he's home. Dinner with his family. His daughter Sarah, 16 years old, bright and beautiful, with her whole life ahead of her. They talk about school, about her friends, about normal things in an abnormal world. After dinner, Alberto reviews security reports. His head of security briefs him on any unusual activity, any threats, any intelligence from the street. Because in Guadalajara, in Zapopan, in all of Jalisco, the cartels are always watching. And Alberto Prieto had caught their attention. Here's what you need to understand about doing business in Mexico. The cartels consider themselves partners in every successful enterprise. They call it derecho de piso, the right of the floor. You operate in their territory, you pay them a percentage. It's not a request. It's a tax enforced by violence. For years, Alberto paid, not because he wanted to, but because he was pragmatic. A few thousand pesos a month to ensure his trucks weren't hijacked, to ensure his warehouses weren't burned, to ensure his family wasn't threatened. But then something changed. The demands increased. What started as a manageable extortion became unsustainable. The cartels wanted more. They saw his Lamborghini. They saw his success. They calculated what they thought he could afford. And then came the big ask. According to sources close to the investigation, Alberto Prieto lost $2 billion of cartel money. The exact circumstances remain murky. Some say it was a shipment that went missing. Others say it was a logistics operation that went wrong, a load that was intercepted by authorities or rival cartels. Still others whispered that Alberto made a business decision, that he refused to transport something he considered too dangerous, too illegal, too far beyond the line he'd drawn for himself. Whatever the truth, the result was the same. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel believed Alberto owed them $2 billion. $2 billion. That's not extortion money, that's blood debt. The cartel gave him options: pay up or pay with his life. Alberto refused. Here's where his story becomes remarkable. He could have paid. He could have liquidated assets, taken loans, sold his businesses piece by piece. Many men in his position would have. Many men have. But Alberto Prieto said no. Not because he couldn't pay, but because he wouldn't. He told associates that he had morals, that he'd built his business legitimately, that he wasn't going to fund the same organizations that terrorized Mexico, that murdered innocents, that turned his country into a war zone. Instead of paying the cartel, Alberto invested in security. He hired more bodyguards, ex-military operators with combat experience, men who'd fought in Mexico's drug war on the government side and knew how the cartels operated. He upgraded his vehicles with armored plating. He varied his routes. He changed his schedule daily. He installed sophisticated security systems at his home and businesses. He knew what was coming. He just believed he could survive it. His friends warned him. His family begged him. Even some of his security team questioned the decision. "Boss, it's not worth it. Pay them. Live." But Alberto was stubborn, or principled, depending on how you look at it. "I won't give them a peso," he reportedly said. "I'd rather pay a security guard to protect my family than pay a criminal to threaten them." It was a noble stance, a moral stance. It was also a death sentence. In the final week of December 2025, something changed in Alberto's neighborhood. Residents noticed unusual activity: vehicles that didn't belong, cars that would park for hours, occupants watching, waiting, SUVs with tinted windows that would cruise slowly past Alberto's home, then disappear. And then there were the drones. Multiple neighbors reported seeing drones flying over the residential area. Small quadcopters, the kind you can buy commercially, equipped with cameras. They would hover over Alberto's property, mapping the layout, identifying entry and exit points, tracking his movements. This wasn't paranoia. This was reconnaissance. Several concerned residents reported the activity to local authorities. They filed complaints. They expressed fear. They said something bad was going to happen. The warnings went nowhere. In Mexico, especially in Jalisco, cartel intelligence often exceeds government intelligence. The criminals have better technology, better funding, better networks. When they decide to target someone, they do it with military precision. Alberto's security team noticed the surveillance too. They increased protocols. They advised him to stay home, to limit his movements, to consider leaving Guadalajara entirely until the threat passed. But Alberto had businesses to run. He had employees depending on him. He had a life he refused to abandon. On December 28th, the day before the attack, the surveillance intensified. Multiple vehicles were spotted. Drones made several passes. It was clear something was being planned. Alberto's head of security held an emergency meeting that evening. They discussed options, safe houses, alternate routes, the possibility of contacting federal authorities for protection. Alberto listened. Then he made his decision. "We continue as normal, but we stay alert." It was December 29th, 2025. Alberto Prieto Valencia had less than 24 hours to live. Alberto wakes at his usual time, 5:30 a.m., December 29th. The morning is cool, typical for Guadalajara in late December. He goes through his routine: coffee, phone, messages. But today is different. His security team is on high alert. The lead bodyguard briefs him over breakfast. "Boss, the surveillance yesterday was heavy. We think they're planning something soon. I strongly recommend we cancel all appointments today and move you to the safe house." Alberto considers this. He looks at his daughter Sarah, eating breakfast across the table. 16 years old, scrolling through her phone, living the normal life he's worked so hard to provide. "What's on the schedule?" he asks. "You have a meeting at the market at 9 a.m. Then the Transport's Odal office at 11, lunch with the Sinaloa grain supplier at 1 p.m. And Sarah has a friend's birthday party this afternoon." Alberto nods. "We'll skip the lunch meeting, but I need to go to the market and the office." And Sarah goes to her party. We don't let them control our lives. His security team exchanges glances. They know better than to argue, but they also know the danger is real. By 7:30 a.m., Alberto is ready to leave. He's dressed casually, jeans, a button-down shirt, expensive watch. He looks like what he is, a successful businessman. His security detail consists of 4 men today, all armed, all experienced. They conduct a sweep of the Lamborghini Urus before Alberto gets in. They check for tracking devices, for explosives, for any signs of tampering. Clear. Alberto drives. He prefers to drive himself. The Lamborghini is his pride, and he enjoys the power, the control. 1 bodyguard sits in the passenger seat. 2 follow in a separate SUV. The drive to the Mercado de Abastos is uneventful. Morning traffic, commuters, street vendors setting up, normal Guadalajara. But the security team is scanning constantly, looking for vehicles that follow too long, for faces that appear more than once, for anything out of place. At the market, Alberto conducts his business. He walks the aisles. He checks on his grain inventory. He talks to his warehouse manager about a shipment to Tijuana. The truck leaves tomorrow. Make sure the driver has the updated route and tell him to check in every 2 hours. Everything seems normal, but there's tension in the air. His employees notice it. Alberto is distracted. He keeps checking his phone. His security team is more visible than usual, hands near their weapons. By 10:30 a.m., he's done at the market. Time to head to the Transports Odal office. This is where the timeline becomes crucial. At the Transports Odal office, Alberto holds meetings. He reviews financial reports. He discusses expansion plans with his operations manager. On paper, everything is going well. Revenue is up. Contracts are being fulfilled. The business is thriving, but there's an elephant in the room. Everyone knows about the cartel threat. Everyone knows Alberto refused to pay. Some of his employees have quietly started looking for other jobs, not because they don't respect Alberto, but because they have families too. Around 1 p.m., Alberto gets a call. It's his daughter, Sarah. "Poppy, can you pick me up for the party? Mom's car isn't working." Alberto hesitates. His security team is already shaking their heads. Taking Sarah with him increases the risk. If something happens, she's in the line of fire. She's his daughter, and he's her father. And in his mind, his security is good enough to protect them both. "Sure, Mia, I'll pick you up at 3. His head of security pulls him aside. "Boss, this is a bad idea. Let me send a separate team for Sarah. You take your normal route home. We keep you separated." Alberto considers this, but he's tired of living in fear. Tired of letting the cartels dictate his life. Tired of treating every moment like a tactical operation. "No, I'm picking up my daughter. We'll be fine." It's a decision that will haunt everyone who survives the next few hours. At 3 p.m., Alberto leaves the office. He drives to his home to pick up Sarah. She comes out smiling, dressed for a party. She hugs her mother goodbye. She gets into the Lamborghini, into the passenger seat where a bodyguard usually sits. The bodyguard moves to the back. Another bodyguard is in the rear passenger seat. 2 more follow in the SUV behind them. Sarah is excited. She's talking about her friend's party, about school, about normal teenage things. Alberto listens, smiling. For a moment, he forgets about the threats, about the surveillance, about the $2 billion the cartel says he owes. For a moment, he's just a father driving his daughter to a party. They're traveling through a residential area on the border between Zapopan and Guadalajara. Tree-lined streets, nice homes, the kind of neighborhood where violence isn't supposed to happen. The time is approximately 3:45 p.m. What Alberto doesn't know is that at least 30 armed men are already in position. They've been waiting for hours. They know his route. They know his vehicle. They know exactly when he'll pass through this intersection. The trap is set. It happens fast. Alberto is driving through the residential area. Sarah is still talking. The bodyguards are alert but not alarmed. This is a safe neighborhood. They're minutes from the party venue. Then, at the intersection ahead, 3 vehicles suddenly block the road. SUVs. Dark. Tinted windows. Alberto's training kicks in. He brakes. Hard. The Lamborghini's tires scream. "Contact front!" the bodyguard in the back seat shouts. Before Alberto can reverse, 2 more vehicles block the road behind them. They're boxed in, trapped. The doors of the SUVs open. Men pour out, not 2 or 3, not 5 or 10, at least 30, maybe more. They're wearing tactical gear, carrying assault rifles, AK-47s, AR-15s, heavy caliber weapons. This isn't a hit. This is an execution. Get down, the bodyguard screams at Sarah. The first shots shatter the afternoon silence. The sound is deafening. Automatic weapons fire. Dozens of guns firing simultaneously. The Lamborghini's windows are bulletproof, but they're not designed for this level of sustained fire. Alberto's bodyguards return fire. They're outnumbered 10-1, but they're professionals. They aim for the shooters. They try to create an opening for escape. The SUV behind them joins the fight. The two bodyguards inside exit the vehicle, using it as cover. They fire controlled bursts at the attackers, but it's not enough. The cartel gunmen are using a tactic called saturation fire. They're not aiming carefully. They're just pouring bullets into the target, hundreds of rounds. The goal is to overwhelm any defense through sheer volume of fire. The Lamborghini's bulletproof glass begins to crack. Spiderweb patterns spread across the windshield. The armored plating on the doors holds, but the windows are the weak point. Inside the vehicle, Sarah is screaming. Alberto is trying to shield her with his body. The bodyguards are firing back, but their magazines are running empty. "We need to move, now!" one bodyguard shouts. But there's nowhere to go. The vehicles blocking them are too close. The gunmen are surrounding them. One of the bodyguards in the SUV goes down, shot in the chest. He falls behind the vehicle. His partner drags him to cover, but he's not moving. The firefight lasts 10 minutes, maybe 15. To the people inside the Lamborghini, it feels like hours. Neighbors are calling the police, hiding in their homes, recording videos on their phones. The sound of gunfire echoes through the residential streets. Then, one of the Lamborghini's windows finally gives way. The bulletproof glass, weakened by hundreds of impacts, shatters. Bullets pour into the vehicle. Alberto is hit multiple times. Chest, abdomen. He slumps over the steering wheel. Sarah is hit. The bullets don't discriminate. Don't care that she's 16, that she was just going to a friend's party, that she has nothing to do with cartels or debts, or the violent world her father tried to keep her from. The bodyguards keep fighting, even as their principal is down, even as the situation is hopeless. They're buying time for police to arrive, for backup, for anything. But the cartel gunmen are professionals too. They know how long they have before authorities respond. They've timed this perfectly. After what witnesses estimate as 10 to 20 minutes of sustained fire, the shooting stops. The cartel gunmen retreat to their vehicles. Quickly, efficiently, they've accomplished their mission. The SUVs speed away, tires screeching. They disappear into Guadalajara's maze of streets. Silence falls over the residential area, the kind of silence that comes after violence, heavy, oppressive. Smoke drifts from the Lamborghini. The vehicle is riddled with bullet holes. Over 200 shots fired, according to later reports. The black paint is pockmarked with impacts. The windows are shattered. Blood stains the interior. Alberto Prieto Valencia is dead, slumped over the wheel of his Lamborghini, the car that was supposed to represent his success, his achievement, his triumph over poverty and struggle. Now it's his coffin. Sarah is critically wounded. The bodyguards, those still alive, are calling for emergency services, applying pressure to her wounds, begging her to hold on. But she's lost too much blood, taken too many bullets, meant for her father. One bodyguard is dead at the scene. Others are wounded. The residential street looks like a war zone. When police and emergency services arrive minutes later, there's nothing they can do for Alberto. He's gone. They rush Sarah to the hospital. Doctors work frantically, but her injuries are too severe. Sarah Prieto dies in the hospital, 16 years old, her whole life ahead of her, gone because her father said no to the cartels. News of the assassination spreads through Guadalajara like wildfire. Alberto Prieto Valencia, prominent businessman, murdered in broad daylight. His teenage daughter killed beside him, a bodyguard dead, others wounded. The level of violence shocks even a city accustomed to cartel brutality. This wasn't a quick hit. This was a statement, a message. The State Prosecutor's Office of Jalisco launches an immediate investigation. The crime scene is massive. Shell casings everywhere. Over 200 rounds fired. Bullet impacts on nearby homes. Witnesses traumatized. Investigators quickly determined this was a highly organized operation. The number of attackers, the coordination, the weapons, the timing. This was planned meticulously. The level of planning and execution strongly suggests organized crime involvement, a prosecutor tells the media. This was not a random act of violence. This was a targeted assassination. But who ordered it? And why? The investigation begins to uncover Alberto's world, his businesses, his wealth, his connections to the Mercado de Abastos. And then they find the darker threads. Investigators discover that Alberto had been involved in what they call rifas colombianas, illegal raffle schemes operating in the market environment. These schemes, while seemingly minor, often have connections to money laundering operations, to cartel financing. Was Alberto more involved in the criminal world than his public image suggested? Or was he simply operating in an environment where the legal and illegal are impossible to separate? The investigation also uncovers the extortion demands, the threats, the $2 billion the cartel claimed he owed. Authorities piece together the story. Alberto lost a massive amount of cartel money. Whether through a failed shipment, an intercepted load, or a business decision gone wrong, the result was the same. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel wanted their money back. Alberto refused to pay. He chose to invest in security instead. He chose morals over compliance. And the cartel made an example of him, but there's another detail that emerges. This wasn't Alberto's first brush with cartel violence. According to separate reports, he survived a previous armed attack earlier in 2025. Someone had tried to kill him before. He'd survived. He'd increased his security. He'd kept living his life. Maybe that made him believe he was untouchable, that his security was good enough, that his refusal to pay wouldn't have consequences. Or maybe he knew exactly what would happen. And he chose his principles anyway. The investigation continues. Authorities are looking for the gunman, for the vehicles, for anyone involved in the planning or execution. But in Jalisco, in cartel territory, these investigations rarely lead to arrests. The gunmen are ghosts. The vehicles are burned or hidden. The witnesses are too afraid to talk. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel doesn't claim responsibility. They don't need to. Everyone knows who did this. Everyone knows why. The message is clear. You don't say no to the cartel. You don't refuse to pay. You don't choose morals over survival. Because if you do, they'll kill you in broad daylight, in a nice neighborhood, in front of your daughter, and there's nothing your security team can do to stop them. Alberto Prieto's murder is not an isolated incident. It's part of a larger pattern of violence that has consumed Mexico for decades. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or CJNG, is one of the most powerful and violent criminal organizations in Mexico. They control vast territories, they move tons of drugs, they extort businesses, and there's nothing your security team can do to stop them. Alberto Prieto's murder is not an isolated incident. It's part of a larger pattern of violence that has consumed Mexico for decades. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or CJNG, is one of the most powerful and violent criminal organizations in Mexico. They control vast territories, they move tons of drugs, they extort businesses, They challenge the Mexican government for control of entire states, and they do not tolerate defiance. For businessmen in Jalisco, in Guadalajara, in Zapopan, the choice is simple: pay or die. There is no third option. There is no negotiation. There is no protection the government can provide. Alberto Prieto tried to create a third option. He tried to say no. He tried to maintain his morals in a world where morality is a luxury most can't afford. He paid for that choice with his life. And worse, his daughter paid for it too. The business community in Guadalajara is terrified. If someone like Alberto, wealthy, connected, protected, can be killed so easily, what chance do they have? Many are quietly increasing their extortion payments, hiring more security. Some are leaving Jalisco entirely, moving their businesses to other states, other countries, because the lesson of Alberto Prieto's death is clear. In Mexico, the cartels are more powerful than the government, more powerful than the police, more powerful than money or security or moral conviction. The Mercado de Abastos, where Alberto built his fortune, continues to operate. Vendors sell their goods. Trucks move their loads. Business goes on. But everyone knows, everyone remembers, the man who said no. The man who chose principles over survival, and the price he paid. In the days after his death, Alberto Prieto Valencia's story spreads beyond Guadalajara. National media covers the assassination. International outlets pick it up. The image of the bullet-riddled Lamborghini becomes a symbol of cartel power, of government failure, of the impossible choices facing ordinary Mexicans trying to live extraordinary lives. Some people call Alberto a hero, a man who stood up to the cartels, who refused to fund terrorism, who chose morals even when it cost him everything. Others call him foolish, stubborn, a man who let pride kill his daughter, who should have paid, should have compromised, should have chosen survival over principle. Both perspectives have truth. Alberto Prieto was a complex man living in an impossible situation. He built a legitimate business in a country where legitimacy is constantly threatened by criminality. He made money in an economy where the cartels demand their cut of every success. He drew a line. He said, "This far, no further. I will not fund the organizations destroying my country." It was a noble stance, a moral stance, a principled stance. It was also a fatal stance. The question that haunts everyone who knew him is, was it worth it? Did his refusal to pay accomplish anything? Did it strike a blow against the cartels? Did it inspire others to resist? Or did it just get him and his daughter killed? There's no easy answer. What is certain is that Alberto Prieto Valencia's death reveals the true nature of power in Mexico. Not the power of government, not the power of law, not the power of democracy or justice or human rights, the power of violence, the power of fear, the power of organizations willing to murder a man and his teenage daughter in broad daylight to send a message. That is the reality of modern Mexico. That is the world Alberto Prieto tried to resist. And that is the world that killed him. December 29th, 2025. A residential street in Zapopan. A Lamborghini riddled with bullets. A businessman dead at the wheel. His daughter dying beside him. A bodyguard killed trying to protect them. Alberto Prieto Valencia woke up that morning like any other day. He had businesses to run, employees to manage, a daughter to drive to a party. He knew the cartels were watching. He knew they wanted their money. He knew the danger was real. But he believed in something more important than survival. He believed in principle, in morality, in the idea that some lines should not be crossed, even when crossing them means staying alive. He was wrong, or he was right, depending on how you measure these things. What's undeniable is that his final 24 hours reveal the impossible choices facing millions of Mexicans: pay the cartels and fund the violence destroying your country, or refuse and risk everything. Alberto Prieto chose to refuse. He paid for that choice with his life. His daughter paid for it with hers. The cartels sent their message. The investigation continues. The business community lives in fear. And in Guadalajara, in Zapopan, in all of Jalisco, life goes on. Because it has to. Because there's no other choice. Subscribe to Inform Secreto to continue exploring the hidden stories behind power. Real stories told unfiltered. Because what you don't see also controls the world. See you soon.